The moon hung low over the village, a sickle of silver light cutting through the heavy darkness. The streets were empty, the doors bolted, the shutters drawn tight. Even the stray dogs, those eternal wanderers of the night, seemed to have vanished, leaving only the wind to howl through the narrow alleys. The river, thick and black, snaked its way through the heart of the village, its waters moving slowly, like something breathing just beneath the surface. And there, in the silence, it began. A cry, soft at first, almost a whisper like a child's sob carried on the wind. It grew louder, more insistent, filled with pain, with longing, with a grief so deep it seemed to come from the very earth itself. "Ay, mis hijos." The words tore through the night, a mournful wail that sent shivers down the spines of those who heard it. "Ay, mis hijos." In their homes, the villagers crossed themselves, whispered prayers, clutched rosaries. They knew the sound well. It was the cry of La Llorona, the weeping woman, and tonight she was close. Too close. Her voice echoed through the village, bouncing off the walls, slipping through the cracks, finding its way into even the most hidden corners. Carmela, a young girl of 13, sat by the window, her eyes wide, her breath shallow. Her mother had told her the stories since she was a child, tales of a beautiful woman, dressed in white, who wandered the riverbanks at night, weeping for her lost children, searching for them, calling out to them in the darkness. And if you heard her cry too clearly, it meant she was near. And if she was near, she would take you too, drag you into the dark waters to join her lost ones. Carmela knew she should close the shutters, turn away, hide beneath her blanket as she had done so many times before. But tonight was different. Tonight, the cry seemed to call her by name, to beckon her. She felt it deep within her bones, a pull, an urge, a compulsion she could not resist. She stood, her feet moving of their own accord, her hand reaching for the latch. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, stern and fearful. Never go to the river at night, never answer her call. But the sound was so close, so real, so filled with anguish that Carmela's heart ached. She opened the window just a crack, just enough to peer out into the night. The wind was cold, biting, but the air was thick with the scent of water and reeds. She could hear it more clearly now, the weeping, the voice, like a melody wrapped in sorrow. And then she saw her. La Llorona stood by the edge of the river, her long hair flowing like a veil around her face, her white dress torn and stained, clinging to her skeletal frame. Her back was to Carmela, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "Ay, mis hijos," she wailed again, her voice a broken whisper that carried on the wind. Carmela's hand clutched the windowsill, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she should look away, close the window, hide. But she couldn't move. She was frozen, trapped by the sight of the woman by the water, by the sound of her sorrow. Then La Llorona turned. Her face was pale, gaunt, her eyes hollow, dark as the river behind her. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they were not tears of water. They were black, thick, like ink, staining her face as they fell. Her mouth opened, and a cry escaped her lips, a sound so filled with pain, with grief, that it pierced Carmela's heart like a knife. "Come," La Llorona whispered, her voice soft, soothing like a lullaby. "Come to me, niña." Carmela took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. She felt the cold seep into her skin, felt the weight of the night pressing down on her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, but her voice was weak, uncertain. La Llorona reached out, her bony fingers stretching towards the window, her eyes wide, pleading. "I lost my children," she moaned. "They were taken from me. I wander the waters, searching for them. Come to me, niña. Help me find them." Carmela's feet moved of their own accord, stepping closer to the window, closer to the voice, the call. Her hand reached out, touching the cold glass, her breath fogging the pain. She could feel it now, the pull, the need to go, to follow, to step into the night, to walk towards the river. Suddenly, her mother's hand was on her shoulder, pulling her back, yanking her away from the window with a strength born of fear. "No," her mother shouted, slamming the window shut, locking it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Don't look at her, don't listen." But it was too late. Carmela had seen her, had heard her, had felt her grief, her sorrow. The cry of La Llorona was inside her now, a whisper in her mind, a tug at her heart. She felt the tears on her cheeks, cold and wet, and wiped them away, only to see the dark stains on her fingers. Her mother dragged her away from the window, into the center of the room, lighting a candle, muttering prayers under her breath. "She comes for the lost, for those who hear her call," her mother whispered, her voice trembling. "She takes them into the river to join her children. We must not listen, we must not see." But Carmela could still hear her, faintly, outside the window. "Ay, Miss Hijos!" The cry, so sad, so filled with pain, so desperate. And in her heart she felt a strange longing, a pull, as if a part of her wanted to go, wanted to follow, wanted to help the woman who cried so bitterly in the dark. The night seemed to stretch on forever, the shadows deepening, the wind growing colder, sharper, cutting through the thin walls of their home. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the crying stopped. The silence was deafening, heavy, oppressive. Carmela's mother whispered another prayer, her eyes fixed on the door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Carmela felt the cold leave her bones, the strange compulsion lifting, leaving her drained, exhausted. She sank to the floor, her heart still racing, her hands still trembling. "She's gone," her mother whispered, her voice hoarse, but Carmela wasn't so sure. That night, she dreamed of water, dark and deep, and of a woman in white who walked along its banks, her hands reaching out, her face wet with black tears. "Come to me, Nina," the woman whispered, her voice a soft lullaby in the dark. "Help me find my children." When Carmela awoke, her bed was damp, the sheets cold and wet, as if she had been lying in the river itself. And outside in the distance she could still hear it, faint, almost imperceptible, but there. The cry of La Llorona calling out in the night. "Ay, mis hijos," the villagers say that if you hear her cry, you must turn away, hide, close your doors and pray. For La Llorona is always searching, always calling, her grief endless, her sorrow eternal. And if you listen too closely, if you let her voice into your heart, she will find you. And she will never, ever let you go.